The Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform calls this public hearing to order. It is 2 p.m. on Friday, October 26, 2018. Present with me is Senator Joe S. San Agustin. The purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony on bills number 336-34 COR, introduced by Senator Joe S. San Agustin. It's an act to correct the property boundary of the University of Guam lot number 2517-17 to ensure that all university-owned structures are located within the boundaries of the University of Guam lot 2517-17. We will also be receiving testimony on we had scheduled Bill 357-34, but the mayor of Agana Heights has requested that that bill be postponed, the hearing on it, so we will do so as requested. And finally, to have a public hearing on Bill number 361-34 COR, an act to voluntarily rezone as commercial C-zone that strip of land east of Route 1 Jigo from the Jigo Church to Track 9210 Municipality of Jigo. Notice of this afternoon's public hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and the local media on October 19, 2018, and October 24th, thus meeting the requirements of the open government law. The committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. on Monday, October 29, 2018. Please address testimony to Senator Thomas Sieta, Chairperson of the Committee on Land, and can be dropped to the mailboxes here at the legislature or emailed to office@senatorada.org. We will now start with bill number 336-34. Present also is Acting Speaker Therese Terlahi. So I'll go ahead and I'll have the sponsor of Bill 336 introduce the bill, and then we can begin the testimonies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 336-34 is an act to correct the property boundaries of the University of Guam lot number 2517-17 to ensure that all university-owned structures are located within the boundaries of University of Guam lot number 2517-17. It's also written on the bill that the legislature finds that the property boundary for the University of Guam was drawn incorrectly, and that critical structures to the operation of the UOG fish hatchery are not included as part of the UOG parcel. The structures include a larva room, a spawning Quonset, a fish tank, and a freshwater cistern, all of which are either full or partially concrete structures. Therefore, it is the intent of this bill that the easternmost lot boundary be extended to include all UOG physical structures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So signing up to provide testimony is Dr. Robert Underwood, Randy Wiegand, Thomas Christ. So if you gentlemen will step forward, please. And also providing, just signing up in favor of the bill is Dr. Lee Udine and Kathleen Moore-Lynn, basically acknowledging support for the bill. So I guess we'll start with Dr. Christ.
Thank you, sir. So Speaker Terlahi, Senator Ada, and Senator San Agustin, thank you for giving us the opportunity to testify in favor of Bill number 336-34. The purpose of the bill is to correct the property boundary at the Guam Aquaculture Development and Training Center, also known as the hatchery, which was transferred to the university through Public Law number 26-35 in 2002. We have a PowerPoint presentation we would like to show, which will more clearly describe the issue and why it needs to be corrected. In short, the existing property line was in place more than 40 years ago and was a boundary line between private land and government land. Since that time, the property has gone from private hands to the government of Guam, at which time the boundary was made meaningless. The Department of Commerce added structures at that time which were on top of and across the original boundary line. It didn't matter at the time because it was all government land. However, when land was transferred to the Chamorro Land Trust, the old boundary was used for the maps. When the Guam legislature gave the land to the University of Guam in 2002, it included all the land and all the structures, including the structures built on top of and across the original boundary line. Bill number 336-34 corrects the boundary line and will enable the university to move forward with a public-private partnership of the hatchery. The land in question is landlocked and has no conceivable use for any purpose other than for the hatchery. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Kreis. Dr. Underwood?
Buenas tardes, todos. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm only here to, obviously, I'm testifying in favor of the bill, and I appreciate your indulgence in holding this hearing, and I appreciate the work of Senator San Augustine in introducing the bill. Basically, when the Department of Commerce no longer wanted it, and it gave it to the University of Guam. It gave it as one intact piece, and that's how it had been dealt with. And so when the Chamorro Land Trust was developed, then they went back to the old property line and kind of lopped off part of it. And so this is really, in my estimation, housekeeping. But it's a little bit more than housekeeping, because if the inability of the university to have that as an integral facility kind of keeps people from not being interested in engaging in a private-public partnership. So the absence of the integrity of the property keeps us, well, no longer me, I'm just a private citizen now, keeps the university from being able to engage in a private-public partnership, which based on the facilities and based on the stock, fish stock and shrimp stock that's there, could be lucrative and beneficial to the island in terms of food sustainability as well as economic benefits. So I think that's it's a pretty simple bill, and I hope that you see fit to support it. Thank you very much.
Now, was there a, who's going to present, who is going to talk? Okay, so go ahead, Mr. Wiegand.
Okay, I'm Randy Wiegand. I'm Vice President of Admin and Finance at the University of Guam. The first page in our PowerPoint presentation it's a Google view, and it shows where the existing boundary line is and where the proposed boundary line is. And as you can see...
Okay, hold on. Video, can you advance it to the page that they're talking about, the first page? It shows the aerial view of the property.
Next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so as you can see, the asset structures have been built on the other side of the boundary line. That happened before the property was given to UOG, and we will, we'll show through our presentation that all this bill is doing is trying to complete a grant of the land that was made in 2002 by an act of the legislature, when the legislature gave the property.
Can
and
you
all
bring the mic closer to you so
Sure.
we can hear you better?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Great, thank you.
So all we're asking to do is to complete an action that the legislature started in 2002 when the land was originally granted to the University of Guam from the Department of Commerce. So next slide, please.
And you have documentation to that effect that,
Yes.
okay.
So in 1995, a private company had been working at developing a hatchery, and they came to the point where it wasn't working out for them, and they entered into an agreement with the government of Guam, where the land would be given to the government for the government to try to run the hatchery in exchange for tax credits. So from 85 to 2002, the hatchery was run by the Department of Commerce. And during the time that the property was in the hands of Commerce, there were some additional structures that were put on the property. And then in 2002, the hatchery, all of its land, all of its structures were given to the University of Guam. So on the next slide is a map, and the arrow is pointing at the boundary line, and you can see as of 1985, this was an attachment to the transfer documents transferring the land from the private owner to the government of Guam, and it shows that there's a Butler building that's straddling the boundary line. And that wasn't a big deal, and nobody was worried about it at the time, because instead of the boundary separating government land from private land, now land on both sides of the property of that boundary line was going to be government land. So it made the boundary meaningless at that point. And obviously, Department of Commerce continued to build on that property. So the next slide is a map that was included in the materials that were given to us in 2002 when the property was turned over to the university. And as you can see, the Butler building is now gone from the property boundary, and there's a new concrete structure that is over the boundary. And then to the right of the concrete structure, there's a cistern that was built probably 50 feet, encroaching on what previously was government property. But at the time, it was all government land. Department of Commerce was continuing to build the structures, and yet the property line was never adjusted at that time.
So that cistern you're talking about is that structure on the far right?
Yep.
The rectangular shape?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So in 2002, the legislature transferred all land and all assets to the university, and the next slide shows the exact language that was included in Public Law 2635. It was introduced in 2001 and it was passed in 2002. Section 10B2 says, administrative and operational control of the Guam Aquaculture Development and Training Center, administrative and operational control of the GADTC, which consists of an indoor hatchery, broodstock maturation room, phytoplankton laboratory, feed preparation room, living quarters, offices, concrete ponds and raceways, tanks, property, land, and other facilities shall be transferred from the Department of Commerce to the University of Guam. So all those structures and all the land underneath them were being transferred to the university at that time, and yet, again, an action was taken, and the boundary at the Department of Land Management was never modified. So what we're asking in this bill is to just modify the boundary line to reflect the actions that the legislature has already taken. So moving on to the next slide. Bill 336 would, number one, officially correct the boundary line and enable the Department of Land Management to revise their maps to include all land and assets that were legally transferred to UOG in 2002. Number two, it would allow UOG to potentially enter into a public-private partnership of the hatchery on land that was already transferred to UOG, but we just don't have the accurate boundings. And then number three, it would place additional land in the hands of UOG, who will protect the natural habitats that have developed on the land. And we've essentially got a policy that there's limestone rock going from the hatchery down to the land, and it's been the policy of the University of Guam to keep that off limits and to keep it pristine as a natural habitat. And this is just extending a little additional property that would continue to be protected by UOG. The land on the other side is now in the Chamorro Land Trust, the hands of the Chamorro Land Trust. It is landlocked. I can't imagine of what could be done with that. On the next slide, yeah, there we are. Okay. Again, this is a repeat of an earlier slide, but it's the property that we're talking about is just slightly more than a half an acre. It's bounded by a steep cliff, so there's no way to get access to it other than through the hatchery. And our hatchery is protected and restricted because we've got it's a pathogen-free zone for us, so we can't allow anybody to come through the hatchery without going through a screening process. And then the next slide is a picture of the remaining land, and as you can see, there's a cliff up there. There's no way to get down there. There's nothing you can do with that land. It's mostly limestone rock, and again, I mean, you can't access it except through the hatchery, and we can't allow any access through the hatchery. So it's a small amount of land. It's landlocked, and we think it's best policy for the government to just completely remove the boundary and enable this additional land to be put in the hands of the university.
Okay. Senator San Augustine, got any questions? Just one question. The bill, so on your slide, it shows that 1985 map of where the boundary was, but now that boundary there's going to have to be some resurveying to show where this new boundary is that's going to be shifted to the east, but the bill doesn't say who's going to bear the cost for that surveying.
Yeah, we hired a surveyor who gave us those coordinates that we included in the bill.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Speaker?
Say that one more time, the last part.
We hired a surveyor, and he gave us the coordinates to put in the bill. So he did a survey, and he found a spot where he could put a marker down as close to the cistern as he could get it, and he drew a revised boundary from that, and he gave us those coordinates, which are in the bill.
All right, but would UOG be willing to create the new map that land management would require?
Yes.
All right. Is Dr. Underwood, I'm looking through another file from Bill 18 in February 2017. What is the difference between that land and this? Is it the same?
I'm not familiar with Bill 18. You have to refresh my mind.
I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same
It's the same bill.
So Bill 18 recognizes that the adjacent property belongs to the Chamorro Land Trust, And since it's in the inventory, Chamorro Land Trust is saying that the value of the land to be given up, the Chamorro Land Trust should be compensated for it.
I see.
And when we had a public hearing, subsequent to that, UOG and Chamorro Land Trust were supposed to sit down and come to some kind of an agreement before we finalize the bill.
Well, during my tenure, I tried in vain to come to an agreement with the Chamorro Land Trust.
Yeah, we did make an offer.
We tried different kind of arrangements for it, but I think, as they sometimes say, I think the Chamorro Land Trust was overtaken by events, and they were not really interested in pursuing the resolution of this issue. And of course, it was always an awkward position for the university, because the university was given this land as a government grant from the Department of Commerce, and then subsequent to that, then we were told otherwise. But I still think that the original intent of the transfer should be honored, and that's why we're here today.
Is it your intention, if we could put that map back up of the property, to replace the cistern and the other building when you get your investment or your partner?
Yeah, I think we intend to leave them as is.
They're functional as they are, yeah.
What would this private-public partnership do then? What changes to the land would it bring? The private-public partnership.
Well, a lot of the equipment is old, so there'd be some modernization of equipment. The fence is in really bad shape. The tanks need cleaning. There's a lot of investment that really needs to be made. It can be expanded a little bit. But there's a lot of investment that could be made to help bring it up to maximum operating level.
And there's also some old buildings that are collapsed in the middle, some sort of Quonset huts. So there's actually space in the middle of the complex that could be used, so that it doesn't seem necessary to go in either direction, but you can fill in, there's space in the middle that would be used for warehouse and that sort of thing.
All right, and so, I'm sorry, but, so land management was asking for, they said the Chamorro Land Trust passed a motion on October 2, 2018, requesting the following modifications to the bill. 1, UOG must survey the desired land to be taken and assume the cost. 2, appraisals shall be based on the value of 2517-17 since the facility has been encroaching for at least 33 years. 3, the University of Guam provide compensation to the Chamorro Land Trust Commission with in-kind services based on the value of the property taken. 4, cost of the survey and appraisals, responsibility of UOG. So I'm thinking you do not have any objection to bearing the cost of the survey or the appraisals, and that a survey be done, and that we're going to use appraisals for this transaction. But when they suggest in-kind services, have you had any discussions with them as to what that means? What is it that they want in-kind services from UOG? Is that
it's always been a little bit unclear what they mean by in-kind services. I would assume that what they meant was that they were going to request some kind of surveys, scientific surveys or environmental surveys or something along those lines. I don't think it meant anything else. Of course, even if, and I'm not in a position to speak for the university, of course, but even if we were to go down that road, I would be very careful to say that the university should be assessed the value of this for 33 years when it was never the university's intent. This was something that was given to the university intact by the government of Guam. So I understand that there's a little bit of awkwardness on the part of the Chamorro Land Trust, and we had discussed, you know, I think at the time, I'm not sure the dollar amount, but you know, they had first originally discussed, you know, some kind of financial compensation. So they backed off of that. I said, well, that's not really viable. It's not really fair in this instance. And then they said, well, how about in-kind services? Then that's where we left it. So I'm assuming that the in-kind services that they're talking about is some kind of scientific survey on the property, because, you know, we're not land assessors, and we're not, the university's not security title, and so I don't know what kind of in-kind services the university could provide other than that.
Could we see the map again, please? All right, could you tell us the additional property that you said would be added, besides, you know, to the right of the border, the vertical line where the buildings are, there's an additional property, isn't there, that this expands to towards the cliff? Or is that shown here or not?
Goes right up to the
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Is there any map that shows that?
Well, it's hard to tell on a map because there's a cliff there, and the cliff doesn't show on the maps. But behind the hatchery, there's about it's about an acre of land total that's back there and all bounded by a cliff, and it's about half of that we need to be included on as UOG property to allow us to be able to cleanly get into a public-private partnership. So that would leave about a half acre of Chamorro Land Trust land that I just can't imagine what value there is to them of that land.
And what about the access then? What is the status of the access to lot 2517-17?
Well, that's what I'm talking about is
The land in question is landlocked, so the only access is through UOG.
Through
property.
University of Guam, but what about your access? Is that
That's public access. That goes back to, even though it's on private property, the condition of that private property is to provide access to landowners. And the UOG is one of the landowners. So that access road goes up to Route 15.
On the left side of the map is where the
right?
access
It's not
road-
shown
yeah,
in these
it doesn't, no, it keeps
slides.
going up.
Okay, I'm only asking because it says in the letter from the land management, they talk about the easement. Easement access to this property is only identified as temporary on the survey map and specifies that a 40-foot easement to be provided when lot 2517-R17 is developed. UOG should continue its dialogue with the Office of Attorney General to legally resolve the easement access to the lot. Is there a dialogue with the Attorney General?
we felt like that's resolved, and we can go back and check our
All
records.
right.
But
If you've got anything in writing, then just send that to us.
I
please.
didn't think that was an issue anymore, and not in the conversations that I had previously.
All right.
The
Senator
last
Nelson?
map includes if you can go to the last image, it shows the access road. So that's about the largest view that you have.
Okay, Senator Nelson? Okay. Well, just earlier discussions, previous discussions related to this situation here. Chamorro Land Trust Chamorro Land Trust is always looking for revenue because it needs to survey and put in infrastructure into the other acreage that it has available. Now we're talking about I guess we need to expand the footprint of the aquaculture farm there, I guess to allow for further growth. And until these boundary issues are resolved, then the public-private partnership that you're venturing into could probably be brought to some kind of conclusion. And I'm just wondering if, what's the university's position if this public-private partnership would also include the Chamorro Land Trust to give them a percentage of at least revenues that is generated by this aquaculture farm? Just a thought.
Well, I can give you my opinion.
Sure.
Not speaking on behalf of the university anymore.
Sure.
But I think that would compound a mistake that was made from the very beginning. You know, and the issue is that when I was in conversation with the Chamorro Land Trust, they wanted in-kind services. And so those in-kind services, you know, are still kind of on the table. It's not clear what it is they want. But the revenue, I appreciate the fact that the Chamorro Land Trust needs revenue, but this is an enterprise that was given as one whole to the university. And because of, for whatever reason, it wasn't, you know, there were different options the university could have looked at. They could have taken it to court. They could have asked for all this. And then the other option was to engage the Chamorro Land Trust, which we did. And then now we're at the precipice of just solving this by law. So for me, I think I would think it would be an unfair burden on the university.
Yeah, and I guess I was just posing that as possibly a win-win-win situation.
Could be. It depends on what the percentage is, I guess.
Well, sure. Okay. Senator Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question. Can you just go back to the very last slide with the aerial view? Thank you. You know, usually when a bill is introduced, they usually have the area of the property that is looking to be reallocated or in exchange for in square meters. And I was just wondering, if the boundary is just in between those two green lines, or does the boundary also include what is behind those structures towards the cliff line?
The line basically goes to the cliff. And so anything on the other side of the line is up on the top part of the cliff. So that's not included. That's private. It's private land.
Okay. So what is the total area of what is being requested?
You know, yeah, our surveyor didn't give us the total amount, but it just being there, it looks like it's about a half an acre.
Okay. Yeah,
we can get that.
Yes,
we can get that.
Can we please get a copy of what, or an appraisal value, and also the total area that is being addressed in this bill? Because, I mean, because the bills just mentions coordinates, no, I mean, it's a little bit more difficult to comprehend and assess the value of land at the legislature if we don't have the
Yeah, we'll get that.
the square,
We'll get
the
that.
total area and the appraised value. And so just to understand that this is also going to allow UOG to enter into a private-public partnership and receive additional money? Is this going to, what is the, because you'll be adding another chunk of land to the University of Guam, does that increase the value of property that UOG will receive or UOG will be worth, and how does that impact the institution?
I don't think that there's any significant value difference. It's just that it's difficult to get into a public-private partnership when you're depending on assets that are on land that's in question, and trying to decide whose responsibility is that to resolve it. And so I don't believe that the whole purpose of the hatchery and us being here is that we're looking for any method possible where we can get additional revenues to compensate for the revenue shortfalls we've been having the past few years. So we're doing this to increase our revenues, but I don't believe that the amount of revenues are going to change that greatly.
Because you're adding property.
Because we're
onto
adding this land.
UOG's.
It's just clearing up the title issues.
Yeah, if I could just speak briefly to the private-public partnership, because one of the things, of course, that is going to come out of it is the anticipation of additional revenue. We're not sure how much, but it's important to understand the value of the hatchery, not just in terms of its financial value. It's a research facility. And it's a research facility which the university cannot afford to put sufficient funds into. But through a private-public partnership, you put those sufficient funds. You beef up the research capacity of that place. And then the research capacity will add not only to the revenue of the university, but the sustainability of the island in terms of the availability of resources that come from that. And it has an economic benefit that spins off into the community. So it's really, I think it's really important to see it in its entire context. Had this happened before, had we been allowed to do this before, we could have had 5 or 10 years of progress. We could have had more self-sufficiency in shrimp, if nothing else. But right now, we are kind of stuck on a sticker burr of a half an acre of land, which is keeping this possibility from moving forward. And that's really the issue. And so it's important to understand contextually. I understand the value of what is trying to be protected. But the consequence of not allowing the private-public partnership is not just measured in additional revenue. It's a research facility. And the fact is that that research facility has immense value, and its value will increase exponentially by having the right kind of investments. So, we have people there that are, we have some world-class scientists that are ready to get involved in that. We have one scientist down there now, but that is not possible. Well, it is possible without it, but I mean, it just facilitates the effort. It just removes any kind of doubts and questions, kind of presenting it as an integral whole, which is how it was originally granted to the university in 2002. So in those days, between 95 and 2002, or 85 and 2002, when it was held by Commerce, it was all seen as GovGuam property. So there was never any question about, how far or the exact boundaries of it. So I just hasten to add that I just want people to kind of see that vision. It's not just a revenue source. It's a research facility. And it could have the potential of being a major research facility with the potential of adding to our own sustainability as a society. And then you're adding economic growth to it. You're adding other economic activities that are going to be possible that come out of that, including suppliers, including people. Where do you bring the shrimp to maturity? How do you market them? What are other kinds of fish that could grow there? What other kinds of marine products could come out of that? I think that we're not kind of grasping the potential of this facility.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Underwood, and for sharing that. But really, I'm curious because we addressed this bill earlier this term, and like you mentioned, it was since 2002 that these things started to unfold. So usually, right, I try to connect the dots to see why is this just appearing now? What other legislation did not pass in the previous, and why? And so it's a very compelling argument that we do use it for a research facility. I'm very very much for that, but really this is in Chamorro Land Trust inventory, and so I'm looking at everything that has been unfolding, not just, the being tunnel vision and focusing on the institution's needs, but also Chamorro Land Trust as a whole. So that's why I'm asking these questions.
No, I appreciate that. I
you,
appreciate
sir.
that very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. I also wanted to just say that I don't think anyone, I think we all appreciate the potential of the hatchery, but we are trying to reconcile also the Chamorro Land Trust's mission, right? And they also, and I can see why they might be interested in an in-kind service, because they are also tasked with agriculture, aquaculture, and expanding, or allowing their land to be used for those industries, and we all know that that has not taken off, and I would think they're going to be needing, just like in agriculture, how they, I think, turn to the university for help in how to best complete their mission of issuing leases, yet agricultural leases that would be sustainable. Same thing with aquaculture, I'm thinking. So I don't think it's a matter of whether we see the vision for the hatchery. I think, of course, and I'm too curious why they, what's gone on for the last few years. But if I could just ask, if you could just please provide, I think it would just answer a lot of questions, a map. So we have a map right now that, according to land management, it's an approved map. So they want us to start with that survey map, and if you could show us how the new boundaries would look. And it doesn't have to be, and then the way you did it on your overhead, where we can see the green and the buildings, if you could do the same thing, just draw the current borders and then the new borders, how that's going to look. Because, the other thing that, I know you're saying this land has no use, the cliff line has no use for the Chamorro Land Trust, but, and that the University of Guam is going to hold it as a conservation area. I'm not sure if I heard that correctly, but that's great. But I also think the Chamorro Land Trust also has to take care of it seems to be looking sometimes for conservation areas, or it needs advice, whether these areas adjacent to your land should also be reserved as conservation areas or not. Or, you made a statement that this cliff line really should not be touched, that we should not be grading down the limestone. And I would really like to hear UOG's positions on these things, because we know this is happening on this cliff line from here down, Fidian, the whole Fidian area. So I don't know, I just think it's important that I can see why the Chamorro Land Trust wants to look to UOG for assistance. But thank you.
Yeah.
So I would ask for those maps, if we could just get at least sketches, at least overhead, projections, that would help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank my colleagues for the question they've asked the University of Guam. But I also like to remind ourselves that we're talking about basically fixing what Public Law 26-35 started with. And Chamorro Land Trust, it's obvious, didn't really exist or didn't do their part. And the university is just trying to correct the boundaries, and it's that simple. And if Chamorro Land Trust really needs help, then they need to move up the ladder and ask for the help. Because I know that the University of Guam, no different than GC and all the other education institutions, would love to help Chamorro Land Trust. But if they're always willing to negotiate, they need to just come up and ask. I know the University of Guam has always been willing to help everybody that's asked for help. And not just use the property as an excuse. Because Public Law 26-35 talks about giving you all the facilities. And that's all this bill is asking for. But if you can provide the maps so we can make it more clear for my colleagues, then provide the map, have your surveyor draw it out exactly how it's going to look, and then maybe that will put closure to that. Then maybe we'll communicate with Chamorro Land Trust and ask them what other properties they're trying to ask for negotiating with others. They just need to do their homework a little bit better. That's my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions. Although I do want to say that I see the big picture, so I kind of have my feathers ruffled a little bit when suggested that we don't see the big picture. I understand completely the economic contribution that the aquaculture farm would have. But I also have to take a look at the other side, that as the oversight chair for Chamorro Land Trust, that half acre, without that half acre, the aquaculture farm may not be able to expand. So I guess I was looking at it as, at least humor me with some reasonable rent or whatever. I know initially in an earlier bill we were talking about basically compensating Chamorro Land Trust for the purchase of that piece of property. If nothing else, some kind of rent. The land has value. Now whether who came to it first. Right now, it's under the it's in the Chamorro Land Trust inventory. So, I think we also need to. We can't lose sight of that. Yes. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one more question. Because we don't have the accurate total area that is being requested, what if you just, and it's around a half acre, what if you just take the boundary of the building instead of taking the complete half acre? What is the distance from where the existing boundary is and the building is to giving whatever setback that is instead of a whole half acre of property? 50 feet.
Sorry, it's around 50 feet, yeah.
Okay. So would you be amenable to that? Would UOG be amenable to that?
To just
giving you the remainder of where the boundary is of the building instead of the whole half acre.
Well, yeah, I mean, the only issue there is that leaves the limestone for someone else. So we would, we
Well, not
prefer to
necessarily
just
because
leave
of-
that to UOG to protect, but we'll do what, we'll do what we have to do, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and Dr. Kreis, I want to welcome you to Guam and to the university. So, should have said that at the beginning. Okay,
Thank you, Senator.
Nobody else has any questions? We'll consider Bill 336 as having been duly heard. Thank you very much. We are foregoing the hearing on Bill 357 at the request of the this particular bill pertains to an encroachment issue, the government of Guam encroaching into private land, and it's a bill that would compensate for that encroachment, but at the Agana Heights baseball field. But at the request of the Agana Heights mayor, he has requested a postponement of the public hearing, and so we will do so. We will then go ahead and move on to Bill 361-34, which is an act to voluntarily zone rezone to C, commercial, that strip of land east of Route 1, Jigo, from the Jigo Catholic Church to track 9210 in the municipality of Jigo. Now, just a little bit of background. Public Law 12-160, which was enacted in 1974, about 44 years ago, basically designated the properties from where the Jigo fire station is, all the way up to the Jigo Church, everything 200 feet in from the edge of roadway, rezone those properties to C zone. This bill, Bill 361, proposes to extend that strip of land that will be given the opportunity to voluntarily rezone to C from the from the Jigo Church north up to about just a little north of where the Gain dog pound, the Gain facility is. Signing up to provide testimony is Mr. Jim Atkins. So Mr. Atkins, if you care to step forward, provide your testimony. Yeah. Turn on your mic, please, and bring it closer to you, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is James L. Atkins. Most people call me Jim. This afternoon, I'd like to talk in support of Bill number 36134 to rezone from Route 1 Jigo to Track 9210, Municipality of Jigo. Commercial zoning right now is from Hagana up to Jigo. With this rezoning commercial, the zone will be from Hagana to Track number 9210, with the exception of the Jigo Church, Catholic Church. Today, there's a population growth in the northern part of Guam. With that growth, there is a need for more commercial buildings and facilities such as restaurants, banks, retail stores, grocery stores, and numerous other businesses. By this rezoning, it will save a lot of time and money for property owners to request rezoning for their property, commercial, and then property owners can voluntarily opt out of this should they feel rezoning to commercial does not apply to them. And again, I support this bill number 361-34. Signed, James L. Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Now, let me just put a little bit of context to this. There's been a precedent already, aside from the precedent that was set by Public Law 12-1 12-160, which initially rezoned those properties along the strip to C-zone. We had one very similar to this just earlier this year. That was with the Tizen. There was about 40 different properties up there that was then rezoned up to commercial, but on a voluntary basis. Now, I believe that this strip of land that we're talking about in Jigo, one of those lots belongs to you, Mr. Atkins. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I think there's, I want to say, maybe 3 or 4 other vacant lots along that strip that would benefit from this, should the landowners choose to opt in and rezone their properties to commercial. Correct?
Yes, I believe there's more than 2 or 3. There's several lots up there where people would like to go and do something, but so some of the other, local people that have land but don't have a lot of money to go into, and it costs money to go and get something rezoned normally, with all the time that you have to put into it, and it takes months and months in order to get something changed. And sometimes people have to go and get an attorney to help them out with it. So that costs them a lot of money, which with this bill, that would make it easier for people without a lot of funds to go in and rezone their property, so they could use it for leasing it out to other people who may want to lease it for commercial use.
And just one other thing, as we were developing this bill, it kind of begged the question as to why we are rezoning just the east side of Route 1 and not the west side of it. And so the answer that I received was that on the left side, most of that is Chamorro Land Trust properties, and they are zoned either residential or agriculture. And in fact, there's really a lot of residences in there already. So the population is expanding in those areas in there. Speaker, do you have any questions?
Hello, Mr. Atkins.
Good evening.
The bill before, we have a bill and we have testimony from land management and we have your testimony, but we really don't have before us any maps that show us the properties that are involved or who those lot owners are. And so when you say that these other owners, they have things that they want to do, we have none of that before us. What is it that you want to do with your lot, may I ask? Because this process completely bypasses the Guam Land Use Commission, where each landowner would go in and apply on a case-by-case basis for his lot to be rezoned, and the community, including the mayors and the people in the surrounding area, would definitely have an opportunity to say whether they had any objections to that rezoning or that particular use, if you were going to use it for any particular purpose. So could I just ask in general what you intend to do with the C zone in this lot versus, what is the zone now?
Okay, in the future, what we're looking at, that would be an ideal, well, just say the northern part there would be an ideal place for someone to come in and put up apartment, well, kind of apartments, but also would have where they can have a bar and all this. In most places, outside of military bases, you have a lot of people that come and go all the time. It'd be like a small mini hotel, like at Anderson today. There's a big need for people coming and going all the time. Now they have to go down all the way to Moaning here to find a place to stay. Now, something in that area, after you get the military, Marine Corps there, then you're going to have a lot more people in that area, which there would be more of a need for like a small motels or hotels of that type. So something like that would be ideal in the future. And the northern part is growing quite a bit. It's as you just turn around and look.
Sorry, I can understand that. Could you repeat that?
There's the northern part is growing very fast. There's another 100 I believe I read in the paper about 160 new homes that will be going up in that area very shortly. So there's room for more, like I said, there's more banking, there's needs for banking, restaurants, and other things in that area. So there is now actually a need for more commercial in that area, and there will be a lot more as the Marine Corps develops in that area, and more of the military in the northern part.
What is the current zone on your property?
On my property, it is 1, meaning for residential.
R1? R1?
R1, yes.
Are you, I'm not sure,
if I may just
Yes.
add, I fell short on this bill. Normally, I would have added to this bill more detailed information, which shows basically a bird's eye view of the areas that surrounds the strip that we're looking at, and puts it into context. Unfortunately, it was not provided here for this hearing today, but I assure you that when the committee report gets out, all the graphic illustrations will be provided so that we can, look at the area that we're looking at, take a look at what are those private property lots that are not zoned, that would be affected by this bill. What are those lots and who owns them? And those are the details, as you know, I would normally provide during deliberation on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think those would be very helpful because we're talking about converting land that's currently R1 or other, maybe even agriculture. I'm not sure all your neighbors, right? The whole strip that we're talking about, what they are right now, changing that immediately to a C. So it impacts the lots within the 200-foot strip, or
200 feet in from edge of
yes,
roadway.
the 200 feet in strip all the way up Marine Drive. But it also would affect the adjacent lots, because then we would have C lots adjacent to perhaps other R1 or A lots. And I am just a little concerned because I think, this is the village. This is the village of Jigo. It's right near the church and the gym and homes. I think, if I remember correctly, there are homes right in that area. So I would like to hear from those landowners how having a commercial, zone right through their lots or adjacent to their lots impacts their ability. Is there a school in this area? No. Yes. Yeah, please. Is there a school?
Well, Mr. Chair, Madam Speaker, what the bill is talking about is if you visit Jigo and you pass the church, you will find that there's apartments, there are stores that used to be Cresco. You'll find a store, then you find the power plant, and then there's a lot there that we have identified and passed that would be the new police station. Then after that is the gym. Then there's Gaines, and that's supposed to be moved to the mayor's control. And then there's also a lot in the back of the gym that Chamorro Land Trust plans on hopefully subdivide those property for residential use. But as you're moving further up north, you'll find G-Mart. I live a mile from that area, so I'm very familiar with that. And across the street from the gym, my colleagues and people of Guam, there are homes being built. I think there's 100 homes being built, and then there's another development. So actually, I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, and I support that we change the zone and allow the flexibility to the folks there to move forward. Because for being a veteran, service member, on everywhere in the world, when you have a military base, right outside the base, at all commercial zones, because all the folks in the military come out of the base to go shopping and buying everything they need. Because bases don't always provide everything. So, so other information you're referring to, Madam Speaker, there are homes. But after G-Mart, you'll find that there is I would say a cockpit or a rooster farm there. So I can actually see that individual saying, I can turn this to a rooster farm. And there are over 100 roosters on that lot. And he's actually produced it to the point where I'm amazed that he's able to succeed. Thank you.
So my final comment is just that when the legislature was considering that rezoning in Tizen, there was a bill to rezone in mass many lots in Tizen to industrial. One of the rationale that was used at that time, I was opposed to this mass rezoning. I don't agree with it. I think it doesn't give the community enough opportunity to talk about the impacts of the use of that property on the village. But at that time, one of the rationale was that because one lot, and I think it was your lot, was already rezoned to industrial in Tizen, so all of those lots in the adjacent areas should be necessarily rezoned to industrial. And so I feel like that's similar rationale that's being used here. Since we've got a commercial zone going up Marine Drive, and maybe it's okay, but that we should then just continue that commercial zone. Well, why aren't we doing that then everywhere? Why aren't, because raising a property from R1 to C immediately raises its value and to the benefit of the landowner. And I just feel like if we're going to do these mass rezoning for benefits of landowners without regard for the communities around them, then where do we stop? Why are we not doing this all the way up and down Marine Drive if that's the rationale? And I guess that's what I'm trying to reconcile. So I think a map that shows what these properties we're actually talking about and what the adjacent areas actually consist of would be very helpful. So I'll wait until I see that to say anything else. But I thank you for your testimony, Mr. Actor.
So I just want to make it as a matter of record that when that bill was introduced to rezone in mass the 40 different lots at Tizon, it was not because one lot was being rezoned. In fact, I don't think was your lot rezoned industrial or commercial?
It was on M1.
M1,
Yes.
okay. But it actually was being consistent with the Tizon Reuse Master Plan, which had stipulated that because the military at the time was using the Naval Air Station area, Tizon, for industrial activities, the Tizon Reuse Master Plan stated that the use of those properties will remain for industrial activities. And so that's what drove the bill to allow up to industrial. But actually, I believe in that bill, it limited the rezoning up to commercial, and it was all voluntary. They had like 90 days to opt in or opt out. And so it was a different set of circumstances. So, does anybody have any other questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of simple questions just to understand the location of the rezone to commercial. What is the distance between...
I'm sorry, it's really hard
What
to
is
hear
the
you.
distance between the furthest north point down Marine Corps Drive? What is the distance of this lot or this tract? Tract 9210? Is it just a certain area, or you're running down the whole Jigo side?
Senator,
Yeah.
if we can just wait a moment, the staff has they were able to get a file that would give a bird's eye view of the area.
Thank you.
So I believe the church is that blue. Can you blow it up more? So the current law,
Okay.
So the Catholic Church is that blue structure there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, where's the Catholic Church? All right, Michael. Okay, there's the Jigo Church. So Public Law 12-160 rezone the strip of land from the Catholic Church south to where the fire station is. This bill proposes to then rezone properties from the Catholic Church north. Now you can see some of the empty lots in there, but just to kind of give you an orientation, right there in the middle of the screen is that like a big naked area there. That's where the GPA power plant is. Adjacent to that is the air.
That's across the street, would be on the side of the church, is the power plant, sir?
Yeah, the power plant, right. Yeah, and right adjacent to that is the area that used to be used by IBC where they stored their equipment, and that now is where the police precinct has been reserved to construct a new police precinct. Further north, I believe, is the gym, and so you'll see there the properties to the north, the empty lots, those are the lots that will be affected. I believe, Mr. Atkins, your property is to the far north of that strip,
Yes.
right there?
Right in that area, yes.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, it's from
right
Jigo
below.
Church all the way up to track 9210 is the commercial rezone.
Yes.
So, is that like 2 miles long that we're gonna?
There's already a lot of commercial activities in there, with the exception of those where the empty lots are.
So we will give the people who own property along this strip to have the option to opt in on a commercial zone, or if they'd like to stay residential or whatever the current zoning is for that.
That's correct.
From the road 200 feet back. Right? That's what it says? To a depth of 200 feet from the edge of Route 1.
Yeah. Mayor Lizama, did you want to provide some testimony on?
And then just one more question, Mr. Chair. Do we have an idea of how many landowners are currently on the on this area that is going to be proposed for rezoning?
We will actually be able to get those details. The lots that the empty lots that may be affected by this. In fact, even the lots that are currently occupied, that if they are currently zoned below commercial. So, Mayor Lizama, former mayor of Jigo, do you have testimony you want to provide?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And just for full disclosure, Mayor Lizama is also in his full-time works on my staff, but as the former mayor, is very familiar with this area.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Speaker, Senator Nelson, and Senator San Augustine. I was sitting in the back, of course, observing, and the questions, of course, that are being asked are so much. It brings back so much memories because as mayor for 16 years, I'm very familiar with the proposal as far as wanting to rezone this. A little history from Our Lady of Lourdes Church. As you heading north, the first thing you're going to come across is a nursery, a infant nursery center owned by the, I believe still the Tamondong family. And then as you pass her, you have apartments that is owned by the Lynn's, the former Lynn's restaurant owner, who still presently resides there. And then when you pass that, before you get to Hills Market, you have the Pagela family that also have apartments that's along that strip. You also have the Maglonia family that owns the former Gresco operation. And at the same time, you also have the Calvo family that had what they call the Three Kings house, those Three Kings Quonset homes. Very familiar with, old-time, structure. And as you pass the Hills Market, then you got the Kyoge family, and then from there you got Charan Pajaro, and then now we go into IBC, like the chairman had mentioned, where Chamorro Land Trust is at, where the proposed police station is going to be built in the future. Then you got GPA. And then, of course, when I was mayor, that's why I had proposed to have the gym built there, because that actually was the whole community concept that former Commissioner Antonio Calvo wanted, to have that entire area as the Jigo Sports Complex, and in the future perhaps see some shopping centers and, the entire strip of Route 1 up to Anderson, turning over to a commercial, somewhat similar to what we see now from the fire station up to Our Lady of Lourdes. And of course, as you're heading further north after the Jigo Gymnasium, then you come across the G-Mart, and then next to that is the got over 200, maybe 200, 300 roosters, or there's in operation there right now. And then further north, you got the Torres, you got the Cruz family, then you have, of course, the Saturnio families, that are up in that area. I did speak to a couple of the families that are part along that area between Chalanfongo and up to La Chance, and they were quite excited about the area, turning into a commercial zone. Many of them, of course, the Tamondong, as I was speaking with her back then, she imposed that question, why isn't it that this area cannot be commercialized or turned into a commercial zone? I go, well, of course, right now you're at least allowed to build your nursery or have your apartments there, operate a nursery as a conditional use, but maybe perhaps in the future, and I think this perhaps will be the answer to her inquiry. And I think it's due time. The community of Jigo is shifting up towards the north side on Route 1 as I see the development across the gymnasium. We have 3 housing developments that are going in the future that will be open. There's one right now, as you can see, that cluster of homes there, right across that arrow. That's the new Paradise Estate. Next to that, or in front of that, is the entire Chamorro Land Trust property that eventually has been subdivided and will be the future housing area. And I believe that as we continue going up north, where Mr. Atkins' property is at, which is it's actually between Chalan La Chance and the Upper La Chance Road, which is the Enrique Rosario area, is where I see where Mr. Atkins' property is at. But I think it's something that at least as a former mayor, I wouldn't mind, of course, where the present mayor's office is situated. It's quite small, and the future plans to realize Jigo is to perhaps one day realize the Jigo Community Center and the Jigo Mayor's office to be somewhere next to the Jigo Gymnasium. Perhaps maybe in the future the properties along that route, of the Chamorro Land Trust, if we're allowed, with Chamorro Land Trust consideration in the future. But I do see the shifting of family dwellings, going up in that area. And if we were to allow this commercial zone, I think it's a good opportunity for growth and development for Jigo, as the former mayor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mayor Lezama. Senator Nelson, do you have any further questions?
Yes, just one last one, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for the testimony.
Sure.
Because it costs money to rezone, is there a potential loss to the government if we bypass the GLUC process? And if this bill should pass into law, is there potential loss to the government in revenue for the cost of rezoning? And what would be that loss? I mean, if it looks like it's about the road, it's about like, I don't know, it looks 2 miles in length that we're going to rezone. I'm just wondering, and 200 feet from the main road back, how much revenue would be lost to the government if we bypass the whole process of GLUC and just do this blanket commercial zone?
I think with respect to the Guam Land Use Commission, it's not so much how much revenue would be lost by your prospective planners that would normally package this and bring it to the Land Use Commission to request for rezoning. I think when we talk about the Chamorro to the Land Use Commission, that's a 5-member board, and right now it has just 3 appointed members on it, and they're not lining up at the door to fill up the other 2 seats. And so quorum for that board requires 3, and a lot of the members there are business people who do a lot of traveling. So quorum could be a challenge. In fact, quorum with the Land Use Commission was a challenge for really a long period of time because they just didn't have members appointed to them. So I think that's more so the implications with respect to the Land Use Commission. And yes, those land use developers that package these and give it to the Land Use Commission, take it to the Land Use Commission, yeah. But even then, I mean, there'll still be some work that they would need to do should the landowner opt to take advantage of this law to rezone their property to commercial.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it does state in the legislative intent that the GLUC does have issues with with the issues of quorum. I thought I saw a dollar value if individuals wanted to opt in, but perhaps I misread it. But I'm just wondering if we're going to do 2 miles of blanket rezoning, the impact of the cost it would have on the government revenue. But perhaps we could do further research on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Speaker?
Has any property owner in this strip applied with the Guam Land Use Commission for a rezoning?
Not applied, but has brought up the inquiry when I was mayor, yes, as far as the question of when can we ever realize our property to be commercial zone, because that's really the question. Now, of course, I did advise them the process and, what it takes to go through the process. And, of course, they ran with that, but never pursued it, pretty much.
What if the adjacent landowners want the same deal, going 200 feet further in?
Well, I'm one of them,
Yes,
because, if the property is asking for 200, and in my case, I am out maybe 400 feet away from Marine Drive, I guess if that ever does happen, so perhaps maybe in the future that they would have to go through the process, be it through legislative or through the JOUC.
So what would happen is if the property that could be affected by this is a lot deeper, then we're going to end up with a property that's going to be split zone. And so you may have a piece of property that could, by this law, opt to be zoned commercial, and the back half of it is still agriculture or R1. That back half then will have to be rezoned, and that would have to go through the Land Use Commission to be rezoned. So the law only covers 200 feet in from edge of roadway.
Right. So the law covers 200 feet in, and we don't, like I said, have a list of the lots or even a shape or who they are or what purposes they might use this for. So my point is that what's to stop us from going 400 feet in? Because when we go 200 feet in and we rezone to commercial, when the next person in goes to the Guam Land Use Commission and asks to rezone their A1 or their agriculture property or their residential property to C also, Guam Land Use Commission is supposed to take into consideration, the adjacent property. And in this case, then, all the adjacent properties will be C. And so I'm just saying we're going further and further into the core of Jigo village where people live. And so I'm just concerned about, I want to know how the residents feel about the legislature going in there and rezoning parts of their village for the benefit of these people without the regular land use the regular land use process gives a very big role to the mayor. First of all, another very big role to agencies to review what would be the impact of rezoning this property to C compared to what it is now. For example, can it handle commercial, water, sewer, and all those impacts that they might have? And so we're kind of, considering this without what the Guam Land Use Commission would have had before it, which is agency review and input from adjacent landowners, because they would have been mandated to notify each one of those adjacent landowners, and the village itself, through the community, the municipal planning council and the mayor. Because, like you said, this area, part of it was planned to be a sports complex, and yet we're turning it into a commercial zone. I think that's a significant change for Jigo. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions or comments. Does anybody have any further?
Sir, if I just may, just to add on to, or to respond to the Vice Speaker's concern as well. If there's anything perhaps that this will also help the community or the adjacent property or those within the 2 mile length, is that the sewer system, and I'm sure that if we are able to allow commercial build up along this approximate 2-mile strip, it would also provide the sewer system up that way. Right now, the sewer system, when I had built the gymnasium, we had to connect the sewer system from Solid 2 area where Hills Market. We had to bring that sewer all the way up to in front of Marine Drive where Gain is at to allow the sewer hookup to make it into the gymnasium. So if we were to allow the growth of commercial zone up this way, this perhaps will invite and allow our community, that's adjacent to this strip, to be allowed to hook up to the sewer in the future if we see this development along Marine Drive. There has been precedent set, of course, with the commercial zone from the fire station up to Our Lady of Lourdes Church. And there is a distance from Route 1, Central Lane, inward, and for the longest time that I've been living up there, and as also serving as the mayor for 16 years, the adjacent property, I've not actually heard any challenges in terms of the operations that are happening there. Perhaps maybe if we look at the types of commercial activity, in the future, if it's going to be allowed that we move forward with this commercial zone, perhaps what are the conditions or what are the maximum of types of commercial business are we looking at? And of course, the existing has been working very well with the community of Jigo, at least for the adjacent property owners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, there being no other further comments or questions, we'll consider Bill 361-34 as having been duly heard. And so at this time then, we're going to go ahead and adjourn this public hearing. Thank you.